and we'll put you on the mailing list. And we send out a newsletter about once a month, just to tell you what we're up to. And we're always up to something new. We've always got lots of things planned. Also, another thing just to draw your attention to is our filmed live events. So from last summer, we started filming as many of our live events as possible, and they are up on the website. So you could experience the Wild at Dixter Day, which was an incredible day. And what else do we have up there at the moment? We have John Little.
John Little
Day is up there as well, and we're adding those. We've got one with Marion Boswell that's just about to go up. So have a look at the films, because for people who couldn't travel, couldn't get over to the UK, or couldn't get around the UK, we thought that filming the live events was a sort of almost the next best thing. So have a little explore through the website. Anyway, I think that's all the news and views, isn't it, Noel? I think
that covers everything.
Yeah.
Good,
okay.
Good. You were sort of almost bragging about, we've got 50 videos. And I said, well, we got more like 100, but that's nothing. We are slackers compared to the lady we've got on tonight. I scrolled down to the bottom of her YouTube channel, and I did some quick calculations, and I reckon she's put 540 videos up there, and they're not 5-minute jobbies either. This woman is incredible. She is a total dynamo. She's one of those people who, when we were in that initial lockdown phase, and we were sort of raiding our address books, I didn't know why I didn't think of asking her then, because she really is a tour de force. In North Carolina, which is a real, one of those real horticultural hotspots. So, Brie, let's start at the beginning, as we should always do. What do you do with gardening? Because you may be called Brie Gluvna Arthur, but you brand yourself as Brie the Plant Lady, which is a wonderful little title. So tell us how Brie the Plant Lady got started.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, you guys. This is exciting. I was really fortunate to grow up with parents who loved to garden and grandparents on both sides of my family. So it was normal that the way we calculated a good weekend was feeling completely exhausted from doing yard work the whole day and then like falling down on the couch and sleeping really soundly. That was totally how we rated, a good time at my house. And I was fortunate to grow up in kind of a rural area of southeastern Michigan. So I'm not a native Southerner. And I was a 4-H'er. So I owe a lot of my understanding and exposure to horticulture at a really young age to the extension agents who, work with 4-H programs to extend this education to the next generation. And not only did I learn about horticulture and like growing seeds and how to propagate plants and how to make flower arrangements, but oddly enough, I also learned public speaking through 4-H, and both of those elements are really critical in my day-to-day career now. And so I just think I owe it all to 4-H.
Brie, could you just explain to those of us that are on this side of the Atlantic what the extension agents are? Because not everybody over here might know what that is about, but it's really interesting.
And
yeah. It's a fantastic program there's a federal component and a state component to it, and they work with the Department of Agriculture. And so you'll have extension agents that have different specialties. Some work with arborists, some work in, agronomy with, field crops, specialty crops, nursery crops. And generally the consumer ag agent is the one that deals with what we have master gardeners in the United States, which is a great training program and volunteer organization. And they also do outreach with FFA, Future Farmers of America, and 4-H, which are both agriculture in kind of their beginnings, but have definitely evolved as America has changed so much and we're not nearly as agronomic as we once were. And so they have a lot of programs now to work with urban youth and just trying to teach practical skills, which sadly have kind of been lost in society, along with critical thinking. So I think it's really important, these programs that, basically give the opportunities to youth. I work with a lot of extension programs that do a junior master gardener program. So it's kids between the ages of 12 and 16. And for 2 weeks of the summer, they go on field trips and do community outreach. And actually, they're a big part of how I get all of my barley harvested. So I depend on them each season.
So you've had quite a varied career. And when I met you, you were working at Camellia Forest Nursery, which I think was near Raleigh in North Carolina. And you've become a specialist in propagation. And I believe until recently you were chair of the International Plant Propagators Society. So tell us more about how you got into propagation and about how you've researched and promoted it.
My first love is plant propagation. And it's my way of getting into propagation was quite simple. It was the only class in college that I got an A in. I wasn't a great student in college. I was distracted by lots of things. And that was one of the classes where you were actually graded off of your capacity to do the work instead of just recite the information from a book. And I had this amazing success rate at getting seeds and cuttings and grafts to work. And remember, the teacher said, I don't know what it is about you. You have this intuitive understanding of how to produce plants. And that was a really important compliment to have been given, because if I hadn't had that push, I'm not sure how I would have done through the rest of my scholastic career. But that stayed with me. And when I entered the workforce, I originally came to North Carolina to work as an estate gardener at a 100-acre property called Montrose. And at one time, Nancy Goodwin, who owns Montrose, had a really successful mail order business. But by the time I was working there, she had closed that component. And so we weren't really producing a lot of plants. It was mostly just to fulfill the needs for the gardens on an annual basis and for 2 open gardens a year. But the then director of the North Carolina Botanical Garden visited, Dr. Rob Gardner, and he looked at me and said, "You're the most organized person I've ever encountered. You really belong in the nursery industry. Like, you love keeping records and making things be in straight lines and keeping track of stuff." And again, it was that compliment from someone who I really respected, and he basically redirected my career. And after that, I ended up being the production manager at Plant Delights, working for Tony Avent, where I really was introduced to the vast world of plants and really understood, like, you will never know it all. Every day you're going to learn something new. And, my love affair with plant propagation just evolved from perennials into kind of rare and difficult to produce woody material. And that's actually how I landed at Camellia Forest and focused primarily on Asian native broadleaf evergreens, but also a wide variety of deciduous and coniferous plants from, both North America and anywhere in the world. I'm kind of a generalist. If it's a plant, I am gonna like it in some capacity. So if I could put a root on something, I'm going to try. And it's been great. I actually have a propagation facility in my backyard now, so I still propagate plants.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about propagation is growing from seed is I always feel I'm dealing with something that's actually genetically programmed, and you get certain conditions right, and you just be patient, and patience is often the most difficult thing, and eventually they germinate. Taking cuttings in particular is much more, it's much more kind of hit and miss, stroke intuitive. And you must have this kind of intuitive ability to know when to take the cutting. I mean, do you feel intuition is a big part of it?
I do. I think that when you're a propagator, you really do look at plants in a very different way. And sometimes I look at a plant and I just think, oh my gosh, I could cut that into a million pieces. Whereas everybody else is looking at the tree and it's such a beautiful thing. And all I'm looking at is how I could dissect it. And that can be a curse sometimes. But you do sort of get an understanding. And generally speaking, and it's hard to generalize propagation, but if it's a deciduous plant, you're going to probably have better success propagating it on softwood or just like slightly hardened softwood. So that means spring cuttings, and that means you need to have a prop house that is going to have a better amount of humidity held. And really with a propagation house, you're just trying to basically level out transpiration rates. So you don't want it to be too hot, you don't want it to be too windy, so the plant is never stressed out. Therefore, during the time when it doesn't have any root initiation, the plant isn't really like suffering or in any need. Then by the time you get to midsummer, you're focusing on broadleaf evergreens. In any range of different broadleaf evergreens, they tend to root better on, slightly hardened. The softwood that flushed in the spring, you stick that usually July or August, and that gives it enough time to initiate callus or at least some rooting before it goes into dormancy. And then I usually stick coniferous or hardwood cuttings typically in late fall, even into winter, and they don't actually get misted, they get bottom heat. So it's a completely different experience. And it's definitely one of the reasons that like cuttings and grafting propagation isn't something that makes sense for home gardeners, because you just don't have the right facility to be able to enable this kind of chemistry reaction to occur to be successful with it. And I'm always like, that's why we have the nursery industry, so that you don't have to have a specialty greenhouse. You can go to the garden center and buy the plant already started.
Sure. Unless, of course, you are trying to sort of produce multiples, and that's my situation of having to, just really try and bulk things up. Now, a name you mentioned earlier on, Tony Avens, now, who I met very briefly on my last trip to North Carolina, which I'm afraid was all too long ago. And Tony's name is quite legendary. I mean, I met so many young people in North Carolina who said they started off with Tony. I mean, that nursery is just mind-blowing. You want trilliums, you've got trilliums planted out like other people have cabbages or whatever planted out. Tell us about Tony.
Well, I mean, working at Plant Delights, there's no question. It was a game changer for my career. I'm so grateful for the time that I spent there. And I think at the time we had about 3,300 taxa in production, 3,300 different taxa in production. And so it's a really amazingly complicated place, because even though they're generally all herbaceous perennials, everything grows differently. And Tony is, I mean, calling him a legend isn't really even accurate, because he's so much more than that. And he is definitely the reason why now the Raleigh area continues to just be this sort of thriving area for horticulture. Prior to Tony, we had J.C. Ralston, who was an amazing professor at NC State. And of course, J.C. passed far too early, but has an arboretum named for him. And Tony was one of JC's students. And so you can really start to see how higher education has really influenced this area, much like in, say, Athens, Georgia, where Dr. Durr and Dr. Armitage were such important influences. And, we owe so much to the land grant universities for having these horticulture programs and making it possible for generations of people to continue to be educated. I just can't say enough for all that I learned working with Tony. And I have these like starstruck moments pre-pandemic a few times where I actually had to share a stage with him. It felt very unnatural. I was like, yeah, just what Tony says.
I mean, he's quite a character, isn't he? I mean, I remember those, I don't know if he still does, but the catalogues would have this incredible cartoons on the front cover, and he was not afraid of sort of, letting fly with his opinions.
He is not afraid of offending people with those catalog covers. There have been a couple of doozies recently that have definitely captured people's attention. But you know what?
Such as tell me more. Wendy has just sent in a chat saying the catalogs are hilarious. So I think we want to know more.
Well, and you just can't deny that the plants that are offered, you can't find them anywhere else. And the plant breeding they're doing, the trialing that gets done on that property, if you have the opportunity to ever visit, just put it on your bucket list. It is so worth coming to see. And he's actually working with NC State to make the botanical garden that surrounds the nursery will eventually be taken over and run through the J.C. Ralston Arboretum.
Oh, that's
so
good.
it's
That's
really great that there will be longevity because that garden is unlike anything else in this country.
So you've got J.C. Ralston, you've got Chapel Hill, there's the Botanic Gardens at Duke University as well, isn't there? So you have this incredible knot of horticulture. Is this also related, do you think, to the climate? Because I just sort of aware of, coming down to North Carolina, on the one hand, you've got all that amazing Appalachian flora, but also, I mean, I was sitting at Camellia Forest, I was seeing evergreen I've never seen before. It's like you cross a line, and is that part to do it as well? You just, there's so much more stuff you can grow.
Well, I think, first of all, we're in USDA Zone 7, which is kind of magic land. I grew up in Zone 5, which is a large portion of the United States. Zone 7, you can still grow some cold things and you can grow some tropical things. And I happen to like heat and humidity, so I moved here on purpose. I never complain in the summer season. What's really unique about North Carolina as a whole is we have 3 really distinct regions. We have the mountain, we have the Piedmont, which is where I live, and then we have coastal plain. And so you have an incredible amount of diversity in the native plants that grow here. But then when you think back to the Pangea age, we have a lot of plant material from Asia that does extraordinarily well in this climate as well. So really the palette is almost never ending. It's exciting now, and I think this is especially true in the last 20 years, but definitely in the last 10, that native plants are definitely becoming more of an interest to people. And I'm on the board for the North Carolina Botanic Garden, which is a native garden. Their mission is really based in conservation. And it's an exciting opportunity for me because I specialize primarily in Asian native ornamentals. And I'm really excited about all the things I'm learning now about the plants that I can actually find in my natural woodland, and the many opportunities that there are for them being good in the landscape, but also being food producing for wildlife, and better for water retention, and there's so many benefits to it all. It's like horticulture is the most awesome industry because we provide solutions to so many of the problems that we face. And it's beautiful and interesting at the same time.
Now, you've, over the years, I know you've been involved in various, what we could call social action. And I remember when we met, one of our earlier events with, I think, our earliest iteration of this, the Thursday Garden Chat, which we started up in Lockyer Harris, and the schools program, the school's garden program she started up, and you helped towing, I understand.
I did. I was so lucky that randomly our paths crossed, and I was there for the original install and design. And then what I really recognized, the challenge with school gardens, which I'm very passionate about because I really want the next generation to be exposed to gardening like I was as a kid. The biggest problem that school gardens face is long-term management. And a lot of times the teachers don't actually know how to deal with the gardens through the seasons and how to get these gardens to evolve. And for me, I wanted to make sure that not only was it a successful installation, but that 5 years later, it was still functioning. And so I made it my mission to just go twice a year and, for a couple of days, have every single class in the school spend an hour in the garden, working in it, learning from it, doing art projects, getting introduced to entomology so that we don't have a generation that's afraid of insects. And it is such a powerful tool. But I think the pandemic has certainly made school gardening much more difficult. And I'd love to see more like not community gardens, like the sense that of like growing vegetables, but like garden clubs that are mostly retired aged people. I really want to figure out how to connect those garden clubs that have a lot of institutional knowledge and understanding of how to keep a garden going. I want to tie them into the school programs, because the teachers shouldn't actually have to learn an entirely new discipline. And it seems like there's an opportunity for garden clubs to actually make a bigger impact in communities by connecting this way. And so that's what I focus a lot on here in the Raleigh area, is just every school garden have like a garden club that advises it. And I find that most time the garden clubs enjoy spending time with the students, probably more than any of the other activities that they do. And so I hope that will be able to continue, and school gardens will maybe have better longevity. And I know Sonia and I have talked about this a lot, because it's a complicated situation, especially when a school isn't in session the entire summer growing season, when all the sexy vegetables are growing. It's like, the kids get tired of looking at kale in the winter. They want to see tomatoes and cantaloupes. They want to see the exciting stuff. So we're fortunate
always
here.
Thought that the academic year that I think we probably both have is it's against learning about plants. I mean, landscape students, I mean, the teaching of plants in landscape courses is usually pretty poor anyway. But they arrive in Britain. It's anyway. They arrive in early October. The first month of being a student is just kind of getting drunk and going to parties. By the time they've begun to sober up and do some work, all the leaves are falling off the trees, and they're not going to be back on until it's almost exam season. I mean, it just really does militate against plants, doesn't it?
Oh, I remember my woody ornamental ID class started in January in Northwest Indiana.
Dumping in the deep end.
We had to learn everything from bare branches.
Yes.
Which actually, in hindsight, is a very practical way to learn trees, but much more difficult.
Yeah. Now, over the last few years, you've gotten into what you call foodscaping. So tell me more. Tell me more, please.
Well, I am like a person who does things primarily out of necessity. And so I actually started growing food, incorporating food into my ornamental landscape beds way back when I was working at Plant Lights, simply because I wasn't earning enough money to actually pay all of my bills. So, I had bought a house in the subprime market and should never have been given a mortgage. Let's face it, we were pretty irresponsible in the mid 2000s. And, at the end of the week, I just didn't have money to grocery shop. And I was like, well, I can grow food. I know how to grow like rare and unusual Amorphophallus. Like I should be able to grow some broccoli for myself. And I started, putting it into my landscape beds because the sun was in my front yard. Here in North Carolina, we have a lot of forested areas, and so sometimes you don't have the luxury of having a vegetable patch in your back garden because there's no sun. And I got a letter from my HOA and they were like, no vegetables in the front yard.
Oh, you better explain HOA.
Oh, sorry, Homeowner Association, which
is the local busybodies.
The most absurd thing that has ever existed. And it's like a bunch of bored homeowners that don't know anything about horticulture that are putting out these crazy rules.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but clearly you've hit a vein here. Jenny, who I believe is in Texas, homeowners equals Gestapo. So clearly there's no love.
Yes, they're terrible. Well, after like being mad for a while and getting these threatening letters and then realizing like if you can't buy food every week, you really can't afford a fine from your homeowner association. You better learn how to work with these people. And so first thing I did was volunteer to be on the board, as if I needed to add another thing.
Another level of aggravation to your life.
You know?
Yes.
But, you know, it became apparent and I realized like, I hate that we're in this time where everything is like tries to be so black and white, because let's face it, life isn't that simple. And, you know, they had some points that I guess were valid, not entirely, but to some degree. You know, they're concerned about property values, and they just said plainly, most people vegetable garden in a really messy way. And it wasn't the plants themselves, it was the approach that people take, you know, like you tear out your front lawn and you construct these wooden boxes and you're really excited about it for like 6 weeks. And then it gets to be 100 every day and you lose interest and your garden is ugly and it's difficult to mow around and you don't feel like getting out your weed eater. And all of a sudden your yard is an eyesore. And I get that. And so I was trying to figure out, well, like I didn't go that route. Like I was just literally tucking broccoli in next to encore azaleas, you know. What about what I was doing was offensive? It turns out they weren't offended by it. They just had this rule. And so it was a really empowering experience for me to work with them, because I could figure out, you know, how I could help other people who had an interest in growing vegetables, but lived just like me in a suburban development, because that was the only place you could afford. Like I didn't move to the suburbs because I wanted to be a soccer mom. You know, I moved here because it's the only place that I could afford to buy a house. And it's been a really great journey. I mean, this started way back in 2005. And, you know, now I've been able to, I hope, help people be a little bit more creative about the idea of gardening with vegetables in a maybe less conventional way. I mean, if you're a home gardener, you're not using a tractor. You don't have to plant them in straight lines. You're hand planting, you're hand harvesting. You can give yourself permission to be more creative. And I know that it's like in our heritage to go the agronomic way, but most home gardeners are also not really depending on what they grow. It's more the experience and, you know, just the idea that, oh, I've grown something that I'm going to share with friends and family. So there's this massive opportunity that your existing landscape offers, and it's bigger than what a traditional vegetable garden would be. So you can do a better job rotating where you grow things. You can also then apply better like green mulching approaches, and you know, utilizing cover crops to naturally improve your soil, and you know, growing legumes for producing nitrogen, reducing your need for fertilizer. And so between the two books that I wrote, that was really what I was aiming to do, is try to break down some of these traditional farming practices and package them in a way that could make sense for someone that lives with a small yard in the suburbs, that wants to do something that's a contribution to the world, but also still not make their neighbors mad. And that's what foodscaping is. Basically, it's permaculture for yuppies.
Right. Okay. You've promoted quite a lot the use of grains, sorghum and millet and such like. What's the great thing about, I mean, because I mean, okay, this last summer I had my first go of growing grains, and there's always a problem about, in terms of eating them ourselves, how you process them. And in fact, the millet it grew fine, but we couldn't process it. We tried milling it, it was indigestible. We tried feeding it to the chickens, and the chickens wouldn't eat it, but the ants did. And we had a line of ants marching from, I think, here all the way from here to Lisbon. But then the sorghum was great because the sorghum grains are too big for the ants to carry, and the chickens love it. I've just, on our last handful of sorghum, if you're talking about growing grains, what's the kind of imagined outcome with them?
Well, for me, I started growing grains because I've developed a lot of food allergies, and I can't really eat processed flour. I can go to Europe and eat without any trouble. So, there's some dynamics that definitely should be, kind of further examined in the United States. But I started growing wheat. Wheat was my first introduction to grains. A friend at a local university just handed me a sack and was like, just try it. What do you have to lose? I like growing unusual plants. And I harvested like 20 pounds of ground flour from that first harvest. And it was the most beautiful thing I've ever grown. And I've grown a lot of really beautiful, interesting things. And it's funny that home gardeners have almost no experience with grains. It's not really ever been a part of the home gardening dynamic. And we, threshing and winnowing and processing it wasn't something I'd ever done either. I'm lucky my husband is very engineering savvy and was curious enough that he actually created a thresher for me with a drill and, like a modified bit that beats the wheat seed out, and then you winnow it with a fan. And I have all these great neighborhood children helpers that were also really interested and active. And from growing wheat, we started to grow barley to be able to brew for brewing our own beer. And then the summer grains was really when I had this aha moment, when it first occurred to me, like, wheat and barley aren't the only grains that exist, and I could grow my own bird seed. And that for me was like the real motivation. And I think that might be the thing that makes this idea resonate with other people. Most of the bird seed sold is actually treated with pesticides to reduce, the maggot population when the bird seed is stored for long durations of time in warehouses. So, if you don't want the birds you're feeding to be exposed to pesticide, the easiest alternative is to grow your own bird seed. And that's where millet and sorghum really come into play. I mean, I eat those things as well, and I particularly eat sorghum because it's a gluten-free grain. It makes me actually feel full. Not being able to eat like normal carbohydrates is very, very limiting. And sometimes you just want to feel like you're not hungry. But sorghum for me is one of those that I've increased my bird diversity by, like, I think 10 or 12 species as a result of growing sorghum in mass just out in my front yard.
And Brie, in terms of area, because when you say you're growing barley and you're growing wheat, I mean, I grew up on a farm where you've got fields of it. So you're growing this in a conventional garden? What sort of size area are you talking about, in terms of square meterage or square feet? Are you growing the grain?
So my main grain bed was inspired by Chanticleer, was inspired by the serpentine border, and it cuts through the middle of my front lawn. So, it has turf on both sides, and then this bed that is 850 square feet. And it's just a big open space in full sun. So it's ideal for growing, these field crops. And I typically will mix them with flowering plants as well. So like the barley that's growing right now is mixed with poppies and larkspur. Both of those help deter the browsing animals that, can totally wreak havoc on your garden. So trying to be creative in deterring those animals while still, being able to grow this. And in the summer season, that bed gets filled with sorghum and sesame and sunflowers, all of which are birds' like all-time favorite plants. So it's funny, the birds will they tend to leave my cool season grains alone. Every now and again, they'll start getting to them like in early June before I've harvested. But the summer grains now are grown pretty much exclusively for the birds, and the winter grains are grown for our consumption.
Well, somebody was asking about, what about, do you have a problem with rodents? But also I'm wondering about deer as well, because I know that even in suburbia in the States, deer are like gangs walking around, ready to pounce on your garden.
So honestly, they walk onto my back deck. They have no boundaries.
No.
As more land around me gets developed, and Raleigh-Durham is experiencing a huge boom. Apple and Google are both moving to Research Triangle. So unfortunately, it sort of feels like we're going to turn into San Francisco or Atlanta or Washington, D.C. Until now, Raleigh's actually been a really nice kind of small town, under 1 million people. The animal population is growing exponentially. Deer, rabbits, groundhogs are my 3 biggest challenges. And I actually do a 2-hour webinar just about animals, because it's like one of the great things that unites every gardener on the face of the earth. Like, we all deal with animals, it's just, and it's always so funny when someone will act as if they're the only one who has ever had a squirrel bite into every single tomato like the day before they're ripe. And it's just like, yeah, welcome to being a gardener.
So I think we're going to have to get you to do a webinar, I think, on Foodscapes, and indeed much else. One question actually that's come up, how, on the sort of practicality, I mean, how much space do you need? How many square meters to get, a decent amount of grain?
Well, it definitely depends on what your goal is. So, I grow grains in a lot of different applications. And one of my favorite ways is to actually just overseed it in containers for winter interest, because, barley's hardy to like -20. So it's, a winter active grass. You can just look at it as an ornamental grass. And 2 years ago, we did an experiment. We did 5 3-gallon grow bags of wheat. And from those 5 bags, we were able to harvest and grind 10 cups of flour. So basically enough for 2 loaves of bread.
Right, okay.
You're not going to never go to the bakery again. It's more about the experience of having done that. And that's one of the things that I did with some of the neighborhood kids. And, first of all, they had never seen wheat before. They had no idea how bread was made or what went into the process of making it, so that there's an aisle of bread at the grocery store. And so now they have a better appreciation. And frankly, I don't think kids are the only ones that need that exposure. We're kind of in an era where a lot of adults also don't know where food comes from. It's a weird disconnection that we have. And so sometimes it's like, if your aim is just to be entertained, a couple of pots is all you need. But if you want to grow a lot, and like for me, we don't really buy flour. We use the flour that we grow. 850 square feet is really all I need. I have yet to use all that flour in a single year. But I guess I don't really bake that much.
Right, okay. So one of the things I know we've talked about in the past was your interest in the role of women in horticulture. When we spoke on the phone the other day, you definitely seem to feel that there's been big advances. But how do you feel the state of gender equality within American horticulture at the moment?
I am so proud of where we've come. When I entered this industry 20 years ago, it was not unusual that I was like the only woman, at a meeting. Or I remember the first trade show I went to, it was overwhelming how male dominated, particularly the wholesale side of the plant industry was. And I don't have the statistics for the industry as a whole, but I can say as a representative of International Plant Propagator Society that we're now well over 50-50. I think actually at our last meeting, we were 60% women, 40% men. That always worries you a little too. It's like you don't want it to be out of whack either way. But I will say from NC State, they've been reporting for at least 10 years now that they are a majority female students in the hort department now. And it's certainly 20 years ago, that was not the case. They may have had 1 or 2 students. And so it's really great to see how that has changed. So we have a lot to do, I think, with having just better racial representation and just better diversity as a whole in the industry, because again, what we do impacts everyone. So, for too long, gardening was the thing for elite white people. And that doesn't make sense at all to me, because gardening should not be a matter of economics. And it's certainly my goal to help continue to break down those barriers in any way that I can. And I guess the way I find that is to hang out with like 7 and 8-year-olds. I find that they're a little more open-minded, than some of the adults, especially living in this part of the country. The children are who we need to focus the energy on, because they're the ones that are going to have the burden of dealing with this, in the long run.
Yeah, that's certainly something I've noticed when I've have been with garden groups in the South, is that they are overwhelmingly white in areas that are kind of at least 50-50. But do you think that's changing?
It's not changing as quickly as I'd like to see.
Yeah.
I'd say I've even struggled to figure out how I can do a better job, because so much of what is behind my motivation in foodscaping is to empower people to grow something that they eat and to be a better land steward, and to recognize that you don't have to have sheared holly hedges and a perfect lawn, that, you can do something more with the resources that, are available to you. And I even struggle to be able to reach out into my local community to be able to just give educational sessions. So I think there's just a lot of room for improvement, and that's a daily motivator, knowing like there's nowhere to go but up. I always say, like, the bar has been set phenomenally low, so every day we can raise it a little bit higher. I will not deny that I get super angry when I go into a new development and I see yet another pointless landscape being installed. And I am tired of that, because we can do better. And I don't know when the building industry is going to finally get on board with just understanding that, 80% turf in every single landscape isn't the best idea for low maintenance. In fact, it's the opposite of low maintenance. It's constant maintenance. And if we could just shift that from 80% turf, 20% landscape, say we just shift it by 10% and we increase landscape space by 30% and focus on, plants that are actually from the area you're living, so that they provide a relevant solution for the environment that you're in. I think that the horticulture industry could be a real game changer moving forward with, the climate crisis that we're in, and helping reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are used, that's really just for maintenance that's not really necessary.
Yeah, all those. What's the calculation on the total area of US lawn? Is it equivalent to the size of some state or other?
Yeah, well, we have 180 million acres of development. Yeah. And most development in this country has primarily turf space. And then usually like high maintenance hedges that need to be sheared all the time. And frankly, like, we're in a labor shortage. Like, those really are the landscapes of a different century, because we don't have the human people to actually maintain those landscapes anymore. So at some point, there's going to be something that just
especially if there's going to be a fence at the Mexican border.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, my first visit to the States was in 1991. And we did, in fact, drive down to North Carolina, and I was actually researching native plant growing, which at the time was such a minority interest. And now I think one of the things that's happened in my life, that one of those really positive developments, has been this kind of explosion of interest in native plants in the States. And okay, I know there's a kind of dogmatic fringe and all the rest of it, but that has been a really, really, so surely that is beginning to sink through, isn't it, to the landscaping industry?
It's slow, but yes. It's funny how we have some gateway plants, like in our region, Ilex vomitoria, the Yopon holly. That's an easy sell. My gateway into foodscaping are blueberries. Because you can buy them in a 3-gallon pot, just like an azalea.
Yeah.
It's like when I start talking about daikon radish as a cover crop, or using peanuts as a summer ground cover, that's when the landscapers really have a hard time following me. But when I'm like, just buy some blueberries, that's step one.
Well, in fact, Brie, we've got a question here that Susan Ryan's saying, are you finding that some of the native plants are suffering due to climate change?
I am. I have a half an acre of a woodland swamp in my backyard that I am not trying to garden or manage at all. And because we've had an increase in moisture, and in fact, last January and February, we had 32 inches of rain in a 60-day period. And that woodland swamp was completely full. I mean, you have to go out in boots to your knees and you sink in. It's like quicksand. And almost all of the magnolias have died as a result of there being not like a drying out period. It's been really interesting to see. In Ilex opaca have actually done really, really well. But many of the tulip poplars are going into decline, and I think it's because of anaerobic conditions. And that's definitely a result of, we have a very up and down climate here. Though we have, I think, a really enjoyable climate. We were 80 degrees 10 days ago, and we were 20 degrees 2 nights ago. And so the plants go through these extremes, and, I have all of these things in flower that then get frosted. And this happens now more regularly. I've been here now, it'll be 20 years in May. And in that time, the climate has changed very much noticeably. And we're, I think, averaging 4 degrees warmer every year. So, it's undeniable that it's happening. And it's just a shame that it had to become a political point. Because we have tools that could help this, that start literally in our front yards, and start with how we choose to go about making the decisions about what we're growing and how we're growing it. And I always say to my audiences, if you keep accepting what the landscape industry has always done, they're never going to change. You have to insist that you want something better, or you're going to keep getting the status quo. And that's our job as consumers, that we just have to say, no, I don't want another hedge that requires you coming here twice a month to shear using gasoline. I want you to choose something that doesn't require that kind of maintenance.
And Brie, I know you've put your email address in the chat box, but what is your website? Because I think people are going to want to have a look at what you are up to and see some of your videos and also some of your books. So
I am
BrieGrows.com.
Okay.
And my YouTube channel is Brie Like the Cheese.
Yeah.
Always have to make that distinction. I'm Brie Like the Cheese, the plant lady.
Okay.
And I've been working really hard at, because my schedule changed dramatically with the start of the pandemic. I've been really trying to focus on just sharing practical, not rehearsed, like you'll see, it's a cell phone video, so set your expectations. But just like how I garden, how I manage this, acre property, and some kind of weird creative ideas for, I think generally my approach is very inexpensive. A lot of what I try to get people to do is cover up the ground with things that you want to grow, whether it's an ornamental plant or an edible plant, and that will reduce your weed pressure, which will then reduce your need for spraying herbicide. And it'll actually make you enjoy your garden a lot more. And it's much more interesting. I mean, open mulch space isn't pretty, it's boring. Plant something, you know, and so I try to get people to do that with seed by overseeding, because that's the least expensive and kind of most instant gratification way to cover the ground up.
And one final question. On my last trip to the South, I came across a magazine with a title which made me fall off my seat in the diner. Garden and Gun. First of all, I thought it was a sort of pastiche, and I looked through pictures of white people, some of them with guns, and I think there was one article about gardening, and I've occasionally looked at their website, and they do some quite interesting stuff, and I absolutely don't want to stereotype them, but Garden and Gun. I mean, this is, I always felt the American South is so, my God, what an alien country this is.
Well, no, I mean, in England, we've got country life. We've got country life, which is gardens and guns.
Yes, but I wouldn't put
think it's trying to be that, actually, because like you'll notice there's a lot of barber in their pictures, which, by the way, I have a barber jacket. It's like the greatest thing I've ever bought because it's so warm and it's so lightweight and like nothing sticks to it. Garden and Gun is definitely, like, I remember when it came out and I was horrified, and it's a magazine for kind of the upper crust. You know, like there's actually a lot of articles about like special breeds of dogs that you take for hunting specific animals, and I don't find that it's a publication that is all that helpful or relevant for my interests. However, this month, which I think it's so ironic, they have a wonderful article about Vince Dooley, who is the retired football coach, which I'm not into sports in any capacity. So I actually only knew that University of Georgia won this football championship because I was watching Ryan Seacrest and Kelly Ripa on like a morning show, and Ryan Seacrest went to University of Georgia. But then I see this article about Vince Dooley, who late in life, like in his, I don't know, late 60s or early 70s, took some classes from Dr. Durr and Dr. Armitage and became like a full-on plant nerd. And he has this absolutely incredible garden. And the article they have on him is really charming. And I was like, well, maybe I need to reconsider. I canceled the subscription. But every now and again they'll surprise you, and they actually do have really good recipes. So, you know, I love cooking and I love cocktails, and they do have really a very good culinary art section of that magazine. But it's definitely not really about gardening at all. That I don't, that's like HGTV. Like why have the word garden when they don't they have no gardening?
It's just frill, makes it sound nice. Yeah.
It's like it's just about flipping houses, so just call it what it is. You know, I'm lucky that I still work with Growing a Greener World, which is a syndicated gardening show. It's really the only show in the United States that's exclusively about gardening. And you know, we're on public broadcast, so we're on PBS and not on HGTV. And you know, it's like it would be literally as simple as HGTV just picking up that one television program, but no, it's more about
we're getting some nice messages in. Thank you for your knowledge and experience, Brie. Great introduction to Brie and North Carolina and Plant Delights. Yes, we'd love to hear you speak again on foodscaping. So I think we definitely talked to you about some webinars,
yes,
Brie.
absolutely.
And really nice to have you. And we've got a had a good number of people in tonight. We had 61 people, and
Yeah.
we'll get hundreds more when we paste this to YouTube over the weekend. So thank you very much indeed. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you, Brie. It's just, you've been a ray of sunshine today. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, you are welcome. Thank you for inviting me. This has definitely been a bright spot on a gray January day.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, happy gardening, and look forward to seeing everybody next week. But I'm sure we'll be doing more with you, Brie, because we can't not. So yeah, okay.
Right. All the best. Bye.
Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.